seeing your beautiful faces. So if you want to stay on, that's good too. So we're going to talk about the cost of caring here today, and we're going to start with a game. So you need to be ready to go into chat, and I'm going to show you a word, and I want you to describe, like just kind of like quickly, like color, smell, whatever, describe whatever senses you would use to when you see the word. Okay, so Kelly and Carl, for fun, you can play along out loud. Okay, so here's the first word. No, just kidding. Here's the first word. All right, what do you like? What does your mind call to mind? Describe it for me.
Squeal,
bacon.
touch. Lots of smelly.
Okay.
Cute.
Cute. Okay. Smelly. Yeah. Okay. Ready? So, did you see this?
That's so
Some
cute.
of you. Yeah.
Oh, somebody said the fair.
Anybody see this?
No, nobody said it.
No.
Nobody saw that. I did, right? My air conditioning bill is going to be outrageous. Okay. How about this? Carl, you're my kind of guy, right? We already knew this. By the way, anybody wondering in the room, Carl and I, not related at all. Perez is the most common Hispanic last name, I believe. We are not related. We are just great colleagues. Okay.
I didn't even think about that.
My kind of guy. He sees the bacon, right? Okay. Here's your next word, Perez. Yeah, I see you there. Good job. Okay. Ready? Work. Describe it.
There we go. Hard, fun, long, money. Exhausting, stressful.
School,
Friends, yes. Difficult right now, yes. Lonely, draining.
Oh.
Challenging, thankful, yes. Enjoying.
Okay. How many of you saw something like this? I mean, you might be an educator, so in your mind, you're seeing, you know, I don't know, this dude, they're mapping the world there, and doesn't that look, I mean, these are stock photos. Stock photos of school always crack me up. It does not look like that. Does it look like this? Because this might be the most painful stock image I've ever seen. Like those teachers' eyes just beg whatever story the student is telling on the other side to stop talking now, right? But no, do you see grading papers and that never-ending space, right? Or maybe you saw something like this, like hard physical labor. Your hands are dirty. You're getting into the work, right? Okay. All right. So those are all good. Here's our next word.
It feels like that.
All right. So it's not a word. It's 4 letters. I can count. It's 4 letters. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. What do you see?
Family members.
Tell me what you
anxious,
see.
Scary. Yes. Kids. Hold my breath. Stress. Unpredictable. That's a good one. Military. Yeah.
So how many of you saw something like this? Maybe a first responder and the call did not end well, and it's something they're going to carry with them for a good chunk of their life at this point. Maybe you saw this. Somebody who has returned from some kind of deployment, and this is the new normal for them. For me, this is a reality that I became very aware of in the past few years. You know, before, I'll be honest, my understanding of PTSD was very Lieutenant Dan, like Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan. That's what, like, it was a Vietnam thing, and it was like homeless people and people who had, like, I didn't have a concept for it until I graduated high school the year before September 11th. And so my friends who joined the military after high school were immediately deployed, you know, within months of joining. They were there on, you know, boots on ground. And now here we are, we're all back home again after almost 20 years. And the effect that experience has had on their life. I understand now what PTSD means in that sense. But how many of you saw this? You know, the reality is that in the world of education, or any helping profession, so as we talk about this, any helping profession, medical, social work, counselors, educators, we are at high risk for secondary traumatic stress disorder. And secondary traumatic stress disorder is also often called vicarious trauma. It is also often called compassion fatigue. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about our professional quality of life and where we're at right now and the cost of caring that we have. You know, what is the cost of the care that we put into the work that we do? So vicarious trauma is defined as what happens when we take on the trauma that other people have experienced. And so maybe we hear the same stories over and over of traumas that our kids have heard, have experienced, or patients that we serve, or anybody that we serve, family members even. We hear that, and our brain, the same pieces of our brain are going to fire. So when the person who has experienced that trauma is telling the story, the way empathy works is our brains fire in the same ways. And so over time, if we have repeated exposure to other people's traumatic experiences, our brain starts to no longer recognize if it really happened to us or not. And it's as if it did. So like we cognitively really kind of deeply understand that I didn't experience that abuse or that trauma. Yet at the same time, my brain is firing as if I did. And that can take a big toll on our compassion satisfaction. So compassion satisfaction is the amount of joy and refilling that giving into our work gives back to us. So Kelly's going to put up a poll here, and there should be 4 questions, I believe, on it. And these 4 questions, I'd like you to rate yourself 1 to 5 on these questions. And if you don't want to put them in the, like if you don't want to answer the poll, that's fine. It's anonymous anyway, but if you don't want to answer the poll, you don't have to. But just kind of take a minute to jot down there, where are you at compassion satisfaction wise in your work right now? So the questions are: I feel invigorated by my work. I'm pleased with how I'm able to keep up with my work's techniques and protocols. I believe that I can make a difference through my work. I am proud of what I can do to help others. And so as we think about these, I am modifying this from a tool. So we are not using the scientific tool, but I do have this modified from a larger tool that I will share with you when we send out conference information, called the Professional Quality of Life Survey. And what the ProQual does is it gives us information about where we're at currently. And the higher our score in the compassion satisfaction area, the better off we are. So if we can answer 4s and 5s here, then that means that right now the work we're doing is feeding back into us, so that when we show up to that job, we can provide the level of support and care we need in a way that protects our own well-being. And sometimes that's tough. And I have a belief that right now this is going to be tougher than others. I'm really excited to see, very few 3s, 2s, and 1s popping up on here. And that's a good thing. And we want to continue that feeling now, but we want to find ways that we can support ourselves to continue to feel satisfied by our work. So Kelly, I think we should end that poll, and we're going to move on to the next piece and talk about burnout. So compassion satisfaction is the joy that I derive from the work that I do. And the next piece to talk about is burnout. And burnout is something that is a little different. So we're going to have 4 new questions here. And so you can answer them as I'm talking. But with burnout is circumstantial. And the reason I talk about cost of caring, the reason I put this presentation together originally, I normally lead off with this. The reason I do this work is that I suffer from vicarious trauma due to a lot of the circumstances that I had early in my career. And I didn't know what it was until I finally had somebody label it and help me with it. But that burnout was the first stage for me. Burnout is characterized by the circumstances you're in. So teachers, my friend Alma Henry, she tweeted at the beginning of the year that she thinks teachers are solar powered, and that's why we need summer break, because we just need to be like recharged by the sun. Because that feeling when it gets to be May and we're tired of putting everything we have into our work, and we just need those couple of months to recharge. And then, man, what happens around July? For me, it's my birthday. My birthday is the end of July. Around my birthday, I am like, I'm amped. I'm ready to go back to school. I can't wait to get back in there, right? It's been reset. But sometimes my productiveness takes a little bit of a dip, or I feel really worn out by the work that I do. And in that process, a change in circumstance can often revive you. So maybe you switch schools, or you switch teams, or you get a new I don't know, a new puppy in your life that gives you some love and excitement, and your life circumstances change for the better, and you recover from that burnout. You get relit with your joy, right? And right, for people who work year round, same things too, though, right? There tends to be just these dips in the year. My husband really has a hard time around December. His work, he works in a home improvement area, and work is slow in December. And so, man, he gets really burnt out of going to work day after day and not having anything to do. Like, everybody's year has those wax and wanes, right? But burnout's circumstantial, and we can revive it. We can reheat, we can heal ourselves in that process. Compassion fatigue is different. Compassion fatigue is secondary traumatic stress disorder. And in that space, what we're experiencing is we are experiencing the same symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and yet it's not something that happened to us in that moment. So I'm going to give you a second here to respond. And as you're thinking about these, kind of think about within the last 30 to 60 days. Kind of where has your heart and mind been when it comes to those that you serve and your professional life? Yeah. And this is kind of what I was anticipating seeing here, is that we start to shift a little bit to a few more of us, still a good number of us having never and rarely. We want lower scores here, right? But there's a number of us that are starting to feel that weight. We're starting to find it difficult to separate personal life and professional life, especially if you've been moved to working in a virtual setting where you're literally working in your home now. I joked this morning that my commute didn't have coffee on the way because my bed is literally 25 feet from here. I don't have to go downstairs to the kitchen to get coffee. And my first meeting was at 8. I walked in a little worse for the wear because, it's just different. It's hard to shift your professional life when you show up in your pajamas to your first Zoom meeting. That weight, the fear of what's happening with others' lives, is something that can come into us right now, and it can start to drain us. And so we want to talk about what are the warning signs, risk factors, and symptoms of compassion fatigue. So Kelly, you can go ahead and kind of end that poll there. And all of this comes into really because we work in fields that are helping fields. We are usually have a high amount of empathy for others. And so empathy, again, is not the same as sympathy. It's our ability to turn on those feelings and really put yourself in the shoes of somebody else to think about what they might be experiencing at this time. And that high level of empathy is what puts us at risk for that compassion fatigue. So some symptoms for compassion fatigue to be aware of in this time and to be thinking about for yourself, as well as looking at others. We're gonna kind of walk through those. The first one is a new sense of anxiety. And when I talk about anxiety, I'm never talking about clinical anxiety that is really due to hormonal imbalances that hopefully you have people to support you with there. I'm talking more about just generalized anxiety that you may have that's uncommon for you. So just this pit in your stomach feeling, a new sense of fear that you're not really sure where it's come from, and it's slightly different than anything you've ever experienced before. Another one is having intrusive negative thoughts. So being unable to stop that spiral of thoughts in your head, and they're just intrusive. They pop in and you're unaware of where they're coming from, and you haven't experienced anything like that before. This is untypical behavior for you. That would be another symptom of compassion fatigue. The next one would be fatigue. Being drained at the end of your day more so than normal, feeling like you just don't have the energy to get up and do things that normally give you joy. Followed by detachment. Now, there always needs to be a healthy level of detachment in work when you're in a helping position, because you can't own the end results for most of the work that we do. We want to have a healthy level of detachment, but when we start detaching from others that we are emotionally connected with, then that is usually a symptom and a warning sign that we need to pay attention to. followed by hopelessness. If you follow my work, hope is the number one factor tied to success in life. It increases happiness, health, and longevity. And when we start to have symptoms of compassion fatigue, hopeless, and feeling like there really isn't a future might be one that we begin to experience. And then our lives become somewhat unfocused. We start to kind of, flit around in different things and think about different opportunities and ways that we could be spending our time. It's hard for us to sit down and really tailor into one thing that we might want to do. And we just are just kind of existing in the world and not really accomplishing a whole lot. And then we begin to withdraw. And at that withdrawn stage, by this point, many of us, our colleagues, our friends, our family members are really struggling to get into what is wrong and what's happening in our lives, because a lot of those first symptoms are really unseen to others. And then we have the withdrawal phase, and people will start to realize that you're not showing up in the same ways you used to show up. And by that point, most of us are going to be at a space where we really do need a significant change in direction in order to begin to heal from this process. So what are the risk factors of developing compassion fatigue? So I'm going to tell you that this is a very shortened version of a much longer session where I go into my background. But if you are unaware of my story, I have 7 ACEs. And I decided to become a teacher to be the teacher that I never had. So when I got into education, I was really bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and thought I was going to change the world. And that didn't happen yet. And so this next slide here's me at, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, just graduated from KU. I am young and I am excited to go into education and change the world. And I look exactly the same as I looked almost 20 years ago, right? The type of work that I was getting myself into was brutal, right? I am from small town Kansas. If you consider Hutch small town, I'm from Hutch, and my first jobs were in inner city areas. I taught in Memphis and I taught in the Dallas areas, and they are very different in many different ways than where I was raised. So the type of work that I was getting into was very different than how I had experienced school in the past. I was very inexperienced, right? I mean, you get put into a classroom and you have no idea how to really do this job. It's not just simply showing up, opening a book and doing something. It is, you're dealing with people's lives. And I had never really been in charge of anybody's life before. I mean, I just graduated college. I'd barely been in charge of my own life for very long. And here I am teaching the future. The dose of exposure that I got to trauma was, it was trial by fire that first year. In my first 2 weeks of school, I dealt with a knife, pornography, and multiple fights. I worked in an area that had gang activity, and I also worked in an area where most of my kids did not speak English, and I speak no Spanish. And so communication was really hard. So my dose of exposure to trauma was really high. Females are at higher risk for developing secondary traumatic stress. And those of us with prior trauma are also predisposed to developing secondary traumatic stress. So over the course of that year, what I learned, or of course in my first 4 years in education, I learned that not all heroes are invincible. And I found myself in a pretty brutal crash. I had decided to move back home to Hutchinson. I was going to have a baby and I was going to get married. And in that time, pretty much all hell broke loose in the class that I was teaching. And I had kind of activated the attachment styles in my classroom. So I had developed secure attachment with most of my students, and now I'm leaving, and it activated their avoidant and disorganized attachment styles. And it was rough. We had a lot of explosive behavior in those last few months, and I was all kinds of hormonal because I was going to have a baby, and I didn't know how to handle any of this new life. Right before all of that happened, though, when I go back and I reflect, I can identify these different things happening in my life. The first one is I became very hypervigilant to trauma. I started to see it everywhere. I started to believe that every kid came from a traumatic story. I believed that every kid was struggling. Every kid was being abused at home. Every kid had no food in the refrigerator. I was just predisposed to seeing it, and so it popped up everywhere I looked. Another thing that I developed was really poor boundaries with a few of the families that I served. In one case, I offered to help pay for private school for a family that I was leaving and did not want to attend our school again. I don't know about you, but as an educator, I can't afford to pay for private school tuition for another family. Thankfully, that parent laughed at me and told me that I was crazy because teachers are poor, and no, she wasn't going to let me pay for for tuition. But just looking back on that, I can see that that was not really a boundary that I should have crossed at that time. I had also developed a couple of very unhealthy addictions at that time. The first one is I drank a bottle of wine every single night, and I abruptly stopped drinking that bottle of wine when I found out I was pregnant. And I realized what a coping skill it had become. But the unhealthiest addiction I had is I worked out every day, 6 days a week, for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I looked really good. And I got a lot of positive feedback for the way I looked. And so I continued to do it. And I realize now that that was another coping skill that had gotten out of control in my life. This developed into chronic ailments such as endometriosis, migraine headaches, and chronic back pain and shoulder pain. Now that I live in a more controlled lifestyle, now that I live in a way that has taken care of the compassion fatigue that I was experiencing, I no longer suffer from those at a level that is not normal. And it's much more manageable. But this also shows up in people in stomach aches and knee pains. Our body keeps score on the stress that we have, and it starts to take an impact in our bodies. Over the course of that, I also began to minimize everything. So when things were really tough at work, when things were really tough at home, I would brush everything off and I would not ask for help. I did not want anybody to see what was happening. And so everything was minimized. I'm fine. It's okay. Oh, I'm tired, but life is good. Things are busy, but it's awesome. In that minimizing, though, I really struggled with finding connection with people because I wasn't letting anybody in to help. And then I became cynical and angry because nobody was coming in to help. And so I find that I was really, I was creating all of this world on my own, but I couldn't get myself out of it. And then I started to avoid everything. I would come home every day from work. I had an alarm set at school, and I would leave at 3:30. I would go home and hide under the blankets for 2 hours until I had to pick my daughter up from daycare. And I would just kind of avoid life throughout the night. And I had an extreme lack of empathy for my students and the trauma they may have been facing at the time, because it wasn't as big as the trauma as the students I had served before. And then in that process, I also started to feel very inadequate. I almost left teaching at that point, and I thankfully was able to have a really great conversation with an individual, and I realized that this was not normal behavior and that I was suffering and that I really needed to help, and I needed to take stock in where I was and what I was doing with my life. And the answer to that was to stay in education, but it was to stay in education in a way that was supported by therapy and a nice little pill that I take every day to help me get through that. And it was something that I needed, but I needed to recognize it because I didn't know until it was very, very late. So one of the things that I have decided in my career now is that at ESSDACK, I get this platform to be able to talk to people about my hope and my worry for other educators, other people who are in helping professions around the state that are struggling with this. And I think at this point too, we are struggling even more. So normally I would love to do this, but I think we're really close on time, aren't we, Kelly?
Yep, 3 minutes or 2 minutes till 4 o'clock.
Something I want you to reflect on here is thinking about the areas of your life that you are sacrificing. What areas of your life are you sacrificing right now in order to give love and care and support to others? And what are you unwilling to continue have the pay the price for success in your career? So for me, one area that I was sacrificing before was I was really sacrificing time for myself to actually do things that I loved and that refilled my soul. And for me, that was a big piece of that was contributing to the church that I belong to. And I am unwilling to have my success in my career. I'm unwilling to compromise my faith and what I do believe that my calling is in that realm, to take a back seat to a career that I love. And so finding time to be able to do that. And once I made that decision, I was able to start to regain more compassion, satisfaction in my life. One of the big answers to this work is keeping your eye on what the compassion satisfaction is and what are the joys that you have in the career that you are giving back to. Where are your success stories, and hold on to them. And what's interesting is a lot of times our success stories are the same ones that gave us the vicarious trauma to begin with. And so this is a picture of me with one of my kiddos last year. He finally graduated from high school, and I made the trip down to be with him on that day. This is the student that really probably traumatized me the most as an educator. And his success story is one that I will carry with me forever, because not only did he succeed and he make it to that end goal, but I was able to do that with him along the way and not hurt myself in the process long term. And so finding those moments that are your joys that fill your compassion satisfaction while maintaining a balance with not draining you into burnout and compassion fatigue as well. The final piece here is that all of our trauma must be translated, and processed trauma will be transmitted. So as we think about the cost of caring, we must recognize that everything we do in our line of work as a helper is coming back into us at some point. We are creating ties into us all of the time with those that we serve. And if we don't take the time to translate the trauma that we take on with our people when we are with them, if we don't process that trauma, it will be transmitted to other people unintentionally. Hurt people hurt people. And so in order to be the right kind of helper that the world needs right now, we need to help heal ourselves so that we can heal others. So don't let the cost of caring weigh you down in this process. Normally I would go into a piece of self-care here, but I'm going to fast forward through that and I'll send it to you. So if you want more information about this session or any of the sessions, you can always snap a picture here and find us on Facebook or at our website. And we're going to toss you back into the main room now to wrap up for the day. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry that this one was so rushed. Love you guys. We'll see you in the other room.